guys, my name is Jo Rogers and I am the CEO and founder of Navistar Legal, and today we are continuing our SME stories with Jane Gunn. Hi Jane, welcome.
Hello, hi.
Jane is known as the corporate peacemaker and she's a former lawyer and mediator. So today I'm going to ask her a little bit about disputes and conflicts, not my favorite topic to be honest, but actually she made it. Some points that Jane told me before, I've ended up sharing with other people. So I'm quite excited about this interview. Jane, why don't you tell me a little bit, or tell us all about your background and where you started and how you've got to where you are now.
Okay, so quite a long way back, I'm a lawyer. So I say I'm a former lawyer, reformed lawyer, whatever you like. And as a lawyer, one of the things when I look back, I'm not sure I realized it at the time, that a lot of the clients that I managed to handle and got on well with were the ones the firm regarded as the more difficult clients. So somehow when it came to sort of looking again after I had a career break to have 2 children, and I took quite a long break then, and then coming back, it was like, do I go back to what I was doing before, which was just being a sort of a lawyer, and I say just, but being a lawyer in a firm, or do I branch out to do something else? And I was really interested in this sort of whole process of how could you manage disputes and conversations and, you know, the kind of things that lawyers do in a better way, really, in a less adversarial way. So then I hopped into the world of mediation and dispute resolution, which is about managing relationships and difficult conversations, I guess.
It's really interesting because I don't on a day-to-day basis think about difficult conversations, but I do know that when I have to have a difficult conversation, I contract. I'm like, I delay, I procrastinate, I put it off. And, you know, as a lawyer myself, I know that that's not how people perceive lawyers to be, but I don't like those difficult conversations. I guess, what do you think it is in you that has managed to deal so well with difficult conversations or has enjoyed those difficult conversations?
Do you know, I don't think any of us enjoys them, and I think we all tend to avoid them. But when I look back again, I think something in my childhood, you know, I look way back to think, you know, what is it? But I think that there was something in the way that my relationship with my mother was, I think, quite difficult, and therefore I had to rehearse in my head, how do I have this conversation without upsetting the status quo? So I think it does go back to, a lot of our stuff goes back to when we were children, and what did we learn, what did we experience, what patterns did we, and I think, you know, I think part of it is that, and I developed these skills about, you know, how to be a little bit tentative in how you manage people so that you're not sort of, you know, treading on toes and upsetting people. And, you know, perhaps that's part of it, but I do look back and wonder if that's a little bit how I developed some of the skills I've got.
Family relationships, the core to our greatest strengths and our most difficult weaknesses.
Yeah. Well, and that's in a way why I wrote the book that I wrote, because there's always this overlap between work and home. You know, you can't get away from this fact that family and family relationships are, you know, an intrinsic part of who we are and why we do what we do. And, you know, that's just how it is, really.
Tell us about your book. Tell me a little bit about why you wrote it and what's the target audience there.
So I wrote a book called How to Beat Bedlam in the Boardroom and Boredom in the Bedroom, and which is a bit of a wacky title for a lawyer, but the reason was I'd been working quite a lot with organizations, with chief executives, and they were always saying to me, you know, as well as the stuff that's going on in the office, I'm having trouble with my teenager, I'm not getting on so well with my wife, and that's impacting on my life at work, or, you know, I'm taking my problems from work home and they're impacting on my home life. So I just thought, and then they'd say, is it the same process? And I said, well, it's exactly the same process, it's the same skill set. So I combined the two in one book, really.
It's funny because I was having this conversation actually just before this, and I was talking to somebody about relationships and the relationships and how we don't often realize that we forget that there's a relationship between two people. It becomes the person that's the problem.
Yes.
The reason I'm so excited to speak to you is because I'm not good at conflict, but it's one of those things that really is difficult. And certainly in my household, it was like anger was not okay. You know, dealing with things, we did exactly the sort of stuff you're saying, like kind of, oh, we'll talk about things in a different way. And I've definitely learned that way, which has meant that even through my career, not being as direct as I would like, has an impact. So I'm really interested, like, what are the sort of things that you tell the clients that you're working with around conflict and dispute? And where do people find it most difficult to kind of deal with these issues?
I think, and I just ran a workshop again yesterday for a leadership group, and the primary thing that comes up is what we're talking about, is this tendency to avoid things, to put them off till tomorrow, to think it's all going to go away. And so, you know, we now know in the mediation field that, and the dispute resolution field, that some of these issues can rumble on for days, weeks, months, and years. And it's not unusual for a client to come to me and say, oh, this thing's been going on for about 3 years. And you say, well, yeah, really? And that, you know, that is really quite common, that something could have been going on for that long, and then eventually, you know, it's the last straw and nothing else can be done. So that, you know, that's one of the things. What
are the beliefs or philosophies that you really hold around this conflict and disputes, things that you say are an absolute must for people in business?
The key thing that I'm teaching, and again it came up yesterday, is being able to listen, to understand, and to understand what's underneath something. So two things, you know, one of the phrases I come up with, Stephen Covey, who wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People: seek first to understand and then to be understood. And we don't do that. We seek first to put our point across and then to put it across again, and so on and so on. So seeking to understand someone means I'm going to listen to what your point of view is, and I'm going to then understand why that's important to you. And the understanding why means I want to understand what's underneath that. You know, what are your needs? What are your interests? What are your concerns? What are your fears? And, you know, in everyday life, we don't do that. But if you're in a process where you're in a conflict with someone, you know, that digging a little bit deeper, listening a little bit deeper can be really fundamental. And then people say to me, oh, well, that's just common sense, isn't it? But common sense isn't common practice. We don't do these things, which is why we have to relearn them. And I just wrote a post today on LinkedIn, which is about, you know, the fact that very basic things that we have to do, we have to practice, and we have to relearn, and we have to retrain if you're going to master them. And it's about mastery. It's not about, yes, this is something I do every day. Of course we do that thing every day, speaking and listening, but do we do it really well is another question.
And do we do it when we're in that conflict? Because I would love to say, yeah, I listen. And I remember somebody calling me recently, and all I wanted to do was get my point across. Like, it's fine. I do listen to people on a day-to-day basis. I love hearing what people have to say, but in the moment of emotion, not so much. So I can relate to that. And that, I mean, these are all things that we're learning. I guess it's a self-development thing, isn't it? It is,
yeah, it is, because again, you know, we go back, we learn what's instinctive, and what's instinctive is to self-preservation, to look after ourselves, to sort of be defensive. That's instinctive and natural, and we have to learn a different way, which might be better.
Yes, and practice that instead of just paying lip service to it. Yeah. I hear you. You talked to me about your the phrase, and this was one of the phrases that I shared with my mum recently, and I was like, oh, Mum, you're going to love this. That was the magic of conflict. Tell me a little bit about that. There's no magic in conflict, Jane.
Well, you see, I reckon that conflict is magic, because if you didn't have it, it's like a catalyst. It's a catalyst which says to you, if it's handled well, hang on a minute, there's something that could be better here. There's something that's not as good as it could be. And something that if we looked at it together in a sort of non-adversarial, judgmental way, maybe we could find a better way. So I like to think about conflict like water. You know, if you've got no rain, your garden isn't going to grow. You've got nothing, you know, no lushness, no green. If you have a deluge, you're overwhelmed. And that's what happens if we let conflict build up, which we tend to. Then we've got too much water and we can't manage it and we get swamped by it. So if we know it's going to rain and we manage to catch the rain early and channel it in the right way, that's what we're doing with conflict. We're able to sort of catch it and say, okay, this is great. I can water my garden with this. I can make things better. As long as I handle it in the right way. And that's what my job's about, really.
Isn't it too late? Like once I'm in it and I'm like having that fisticuffs or I'm having that irritated phone call with somebody, isn't it too late to have that conversation with you?
Well, when we talked before, we talked about this whole process of escalation, didn't we? So there's a whole process of escalation of conflict, and it's never too late, but there are times when it gets more difficult. So I'll run you through that really quickly, Jo. At the very beginning, when we're starting to have a sort of sense of tension or conflict with others, we either stop talking or our conversation becomes a little bit dysfunctional, a bit disjointed. And the second thing we do then is we start to form groups. We get, we go externally to find support for our position, our story or whatever. Then we create stories. So we start telling and retelling those stories. And as you go down the escalator, you start to, perhaps those groups or those people who are advising you start to sort of issue threats, or you take actions. And then right down at the bottom of the escalator are 2 steps, which are really important to know. The penultimate one is, I must save face. And the final one is, let's go into the abyss together. And the further down the escalator you go, obviously. So I do liken it to being on, I tell a story when I'm speaking about being on an escalator in the department store with my mother on the escalator going up and me running up the going down escalator. Because it's like that, you're trying to get up the escalator and actually somebody has to press the red button and say, hang on, let's stop this escalator, and then we can go back up. So that's really what you're doing, either yourself, because you recognize that you're in this place, or you get someone else in and go, let's just press the red button, take a pause, and see how we can de-escalate this conflict.
Oh, great. You just mentioned there about speaking. I know you do training as well. Tell me how you got into speaking, and is it something you love to do? And what would you, I was going to say, what would you advise? I know there's elements of speaking that are difficult to replicate, but what would you say to people who want to be speaking during this time where there's not really that many events going on?
Yeah, so I do love to speak. It wasn't something I intended to do. In fact, I got involved in a project maybe about 20 years ago when we were looking at another bug, which was the millennium bug. And the millennium bug we all thought was going to sort of take over our computers and make the world come crashing down overnight. So we had the organization I was working for, we had a sort of a framework, a pledge, which organizations promised that they would use non-adversarial means of dispute resolution. And by promoting that, I actually got to go and speak internationally, and it wasn't something I'd ever done before, but I was so excited to promote this concept of dispute resolution. So I ended up, quite bizarrely, going to speak at the UN,
Wow.
the White House, the European Commission. I mean, it was an international project, and I went and spoke at those places, which was great. But it was because there was a message that I felt was really important at that time, and I still do. I think even now in the current situation that we're in, it's a very, very relevant message, is that, you know, if we collaborate over problem solving, whatever that problem solving is and whatever level that's at, it's a much better way than being adversarial and blaming and backbiting. So, you know, that message is as relevant today as it was 20 years ago, really.
And much easier to do that in this environment where if somebody's got, you know, if a business is going under, it's not necessarily their fault, and therefore there's kind of a bit more like, hey guys, you know, reaching down, pull them up. There's a bit more of that collaboration going on. Whereas I think, you know, if this was a situation of the business's own making, for example, there'll be a little less sympathy or empathy for the business themselves, and then it becomes a, yeah, well, this was your fault sort of thing. So I can imagine that your job's going to be a little easier, somewhat easier, in disputes coming out now as a result of COVID. I'm going to guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're expecting that there will be a lot of conflicts, if not disputes, because there obviously are a lot of problems for organisations, and we're hoping to, and I'm certainly hoping that they will take the opportunity to resolve them early and not go to court. So we are back in that situation where it's a great tool to use. It's a fantastic business tool to use.
Yeah. Awesome. I wanted to also ask you, because I firstly don't meet that many women with a board role, and I know you have had and have many. I want to find out how you decided to go for board roles and what you advise other, particularly women, but other individuals looking at board roles in this time, or maybe not just in this time.
Yes.
Any time.
I guess I didn't decide. I was invited and I said yes. And I suppose looking back again, a lot of the things that I've done in my career is just me saying, oh yes, okay, I'll do that. Why not? So I have this thing, just say yes to everything. So being invited to be on a board. So the first board I was invited to be on, I think I was the first woman. And, I don't know, but there was a sense then that an all-male board was quite adversarial. And one of the things I've been interested in, and we talked a little bit about the Tomorrow's Company inquiry, but one of the things about, organizations and the sort of patriarchal approaches, this adversarial approach to relationships. And so that seemed to be going on, and just being one woman on a board seemed to make a difference. It's difficult to say what that is, but I think the difference, and I do think there is a difference between male and female energy. Where you put that in terms of whether you're a man or you're a woman is a different thing altogether. It's a different question altogether, but we do need these balance of male and female energy, I think, in meetings, in boards, in organizations. And I think for me, that's just bringing that sort of different perspective and welcoming diversity and difference on boards is brilliant. So that's been my experience. So champion
the female board member. Yeah, so there's no, I guess that's it, which would probably suggest that there's a kind of showing up, say yes, and do your best in any moment, and then that will come. You're also PSA. I was going to ask about the PSA, but then I'm thinking, is that current role or is that ex role?
That's an ex role. So I was president of the Professional Speaking Association, and on their board for some time, about 5 years. Now I've been on the board of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, and I'm the chair of their board of management currently. So that's again been an interesting role, chairing. It's an international board, really, really interesting role. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, learned a lot from that too.
Yeah, so long ambulances outside. It's so I don't meet that many women that are on the board. But what's interesting to me is both the lawyer and the kind of mediator. I can imagine that actually puts you in a great position. Do you find that you're using a lot of your mediation and the things in your day-to-day in order to kind of manage the situation?
Yeah, I do. And I've even started running sort of training workshops for how to run better meetings. So I think, a lot of it is about it's being inclusive, it's listening to people, it's summarizing what's going on, it's just being able to manage a large meeting of diverse views and opinions. So a lot of my mediation skills would come into play on a board.
So you almost become the mediator within the room. They're like, oh, this is how somebody is mediating one of our decisions.
Yeah, and I honestly think those skills would be so valuable in the boardroom. Absolutely, they're really transferable and useful for people. So everybody should learn mediation skills for their boardroom.
Right. Why? Before we close up, I'm really interested in what topics you train on, who you train, where people can get in contact with you, where you find your book. So where can we find out more, Jane? Where can we learn more about you?
Okay, so I have a website. Obviously, it's just janegunn.co.uk. So I've got information there. My training courses and my speaking is generally around this topic of conflict resolution and within organizations, and always customized to what clients want. And I do now offer online training. So we've got online training and training courses that people can sort of deliver to their organizations virtually too.
What's the problem that the board, team, business are usually experiencing? Is it that there's a kind of a dissonance within the team, or is it before that? Are you finding people coming to you and saying, well, actually, we just want to run a great team. We've got this. What are the things you see?
Usually the latter, and I wish it was the earlier, but usually, you know, something's hit the fan before someone comes to me, and then they say,
right.
And you know, my real drive is to say, be much more proactive, put in place sort of systems and processes, and skill up your staff in this mediation skills, because it's invaluable. You know, it can help you to run better meetings, you can have better board meetings, you can have better collaboration, you can have basically a better business culture, is what it's all about. So
amazing.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I'm looking forward to see you. Where do we find your book, and where do we get in contact with you, Jane?
So thank you very much, Joe. So my book is available on Amazon. I've got 2 books available there. And if you'd like, I can give you a link for your viewers, which is, I've put together some special mini videos, which are for times of change, challenge, and crisis. So you can look for those there as well.
Awesome. I will make sure that those go at the end of our video. So we should have a link to that at the end of the video and in the YouTube box. Guys, for those of you that have joined us for this SME series, thank you so much for being a part of it. I hope you enjoyed Jane's story and her wisdom around conflict. Let's focus on early conflict resolution, and I'm drilling that into my own mind as well as anybody else's. The subscribe button is down here. Otherwise, I really appreciate you being a part of our journey. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.